Now, at the height of the 60s, just about that time, 60, 60, whatever the hell it was.
1960.
Yeah. Now, at that time, the in group were cool. Cool really means a limited number of responses to any given situation, a repertoire, so that you never show shock or amazement. That's for squares. You're hip, you're wise, you've heard it before. Nobody can shock or startle you, Worldly, that was the pose called being cool. So here's a movie that's like super cool. Not only that, it's Las Vegas before Circus Circus moved in and turned it into a family affair, but it was nightlife at its most glittering with the biggest stars and nice clothing and croupiers and money flashing back and forth and big food and banquets, and there it is on the screen, zap, 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 zap. There's Red Skelton coming in to buy his chips, and there's Sinatra throwing some money on the floor to distract a guard. Little vignettes in lush color, shot amazingly clean. Some directors love a cluttered set, a dirty set. They'll shoot through things to see what they want to see, because they like things in the foreground that you're not quite sure what it is. Others, they want a completely sterile thing, like Star Trek is very sterile, very clean. No disorder unless contrived, unless for a purpose.
This is Herbert F. Solow, who along with Robert H. Justman wrote Star Trek, The Real Story.
Correct.
Which is the newest, biggest, and most comprehensive book about the Star Trek phenomenon.
At the beginning, the first, as I understand, they now call it the classic series.
Yeah, the classic
series. For us,
series.
it is the only series.
It is the only series.
The only series.
And this is Yvonne Fern, who wrote Gene Roddenberry, The Last Conversation, which is the last conversation or last interview, an extensive interview with Gene Roddenberry. So we've got the beginning of Star Trek, we've got the end of Star Trek, we've got 35 years of information, total information about the foreground and the background of what happened. I am especially interested in the whole concept of the networks and how in the world could Gene Roddenberry, whom I know, have sold this Star Trek and has gotten in multiples, 20 some odd episodes of it. And this is the man who captured it, who went to New York, made the deal, brought back the deal, and told Gene Roddenberry for the first time that he was now a movie producer, a television producer. You were Gene Roddenberry's boss. Tell me about the early days. Everything you know.
Well, for those who haven't read the book, I first met Gene in 1964. I think it was March or April of '64 when he came to be interviewed as a writer-producer. He had an idea. Came in the office. I was then head of Desilu. I was then head of programs for Desilu, having been hired from NBC to try to get television moving again at the studio, since a few years prior, Lucy and Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz had gotten divorced, and Desi was the one who really caused Desilu to function as a production entity. Lucy tried it herself a couple of years after that divorce, and it did not work. So I was hired from NBC to try to get it started again. And the first two people I dealt with, I interviewed and liked their ideas and hired were Gene Roddenberry and Bruce Geller. Bruce having done the Mission with me for 7 years, so Mission Impossible. I have to say Mission, people don't know what I'm talking about. Just like Yvonne has told me, always say Lucille Ball, because I have been prone to say in discussing with people, I work for Lucy, and they look at me as if to say, who is Lucy? So I now have to say, we're not getting old, George, they're getting young. Just so I now say Lucille Ball, and as Yvonne points out, I say Mission Impossible. Roddenberry had an idea, it was on a single piece of paper. Roddenberry was a kind of a journeyman television writer, had created and developed one television series called The Lieutenant that was on the air for 1 year at MGM and NBC. that got canceled. And Gene really wasn't the producer of it because the guy who did it, Gene worked under Norman Feldman. Norman Feldman, it was his production company, and Norman was the one highly experienced with Man from U.N.C.L.E. and such in doing a television series. So when I got Gene, I got a decent writer with limited experience as a producer. A man who'd been an airline pilot and a cop, not a college-educated man. So I got one kind of writer to deal with. Bruce was the opposite, successful producer, Yale graduate, et cetera, et cetera. With Gene, you say that Gene was able to get it sold to NBC. Actually, Gene was not able to get it sold to NBC. The original sale to NBC came from me going to NBC, having worked there as head of daytime, and having worked for a man named Grant Tinker, who was and still is a very close friend, and going to Tinker and say, listen, this is something that at Desilu I want to do. It's something that is color, and you guys are just going into the full color network business. Because then, remember, NBC was owned by RCA, and that was the big push. Let's get color on there. And we do the little, I wrote this little scene in the book, which is actually is almost verbatim how it happened, because NBC listened, Grant and his production vice president, Jerry Stanley, and they said, well, thanks a lot, Herb, but, we'll call you. And I know what that means. I was in this business even then too long, and I said, you're not going to call anyone. I'm staying here until you give me an order for a script. I'm going to sit here. And I sat, and Roddenberry got up. I said, sit down. We're staying. I looked around, and Tinker looked at me and said, what are you going to have for dinner? And I said, what you're having, Grant? So I sat there. They're not going to throw me out. I sat there, and finally Jerry looked at Grant, and Grant smiled, and Jerry said to me, Solo, you're a real pain in the ass. And I said, that's true. Do we get the script? He says, okay, you got a script order. I told Roddenberry, now we go.
Now we
left.